Okay, cool, we're live. So we're using Google Hangouts to broadcast this to YouTube right now. So you'll be able to go back and watch it, or anyone can watch it right now as we're going. Okay, cool. So today we're going to talk really quickly about CSS animations and transitions. And I'm basically going to talk about how I got into it, where I am with it, and how I'm using it on various sites. And then Scott is going to talk about how to make your web page load faster to support all these animations you just threw in. Cool. So basically, has anyone seen sites like this where you have a CSS animation generator? Well, first off, has anyone done any work with CSS animations? Perfect. Scott has. That makes sense. So they're somewhat complex in that there's a lot of code that is needed. And that's why we have a lot of sites that are like this, where you have an animation generator where you can just select an animation. Oh, I'm clicking on the screen. Like bounce in, ease in, and how long. And let's make it infinite, and let's check out the HTML CSS, right? So we've got all sorts of junk here, right? And what I really want to do today is kind of look at what all this junk is doing and kind of tweak it and show you guys that it's really not that intimidating, and it's quite simple. So for the example, we're just going to go through a generic situation where you find this nice website that has all sorts of different animations, and you want to throw this on your site. Let's say you've got a button that you want to fly in from the left, or slide up and kind of draw attention or pop. And let's say we find this animation here called slide up, right? So a nice little graphic like that. Let me refresh. Right, pretty subtle, pretty easy. So on this website, you can just go here. You can download their CSS file. Ignore all that stuff we just saw. Download their CSS file, include it in your project. Right here we see, I'll make this bigger in a sec. Right here we see include the CSS sheet animations. And then on any class in here, I can add that class that calls that animation. Let's put it right on that button. Oh, actually, we have to look at this web page, huh? Let me open this guy in Chrome. Cool. Here's our template. We're going to play around with this a little bit today. So what I want to do is I want to get that nice slide in or slide up. I have to refresh this every time. On that button that's in my Jumbotron, right? Draw attention, make it look nice. So in order to do that, I'm going to go into my Sublime Text. I'm going to find where that button is. It's right here. Right? We've got aref, we've got a class on it that are calling in all those styles, all that generic bootstrap stuff. And all I'm going to do is type in slide up. Right? So what this is doing is it's calling that animation CSS and calling a bunch of those styles that we were looking at with that first generator to be on that button. So let's see what happens. Hopefully it works. There it goes. So everyone see how easy that was. Nod your head, say, wow, so easy. Right, but there's a little more going on here. And let's play around with one more element. And let's say we want it to slide right. Right, so that's pretty cool, right? Sliding right. And so yes, I'm just going to go here, and I'm going to type in slide right. And let's see what happens on my bootstrap. Cool, there it goes. I heard a wow. Who said that? Absolutely wow. So super cool, right? Super easy. Tons of people are making these animation CSS styles for you to do whatever you want with. But the problem that I found was that I didn't really exactly like how it looked. Right? I don't want it to jiggle. Maybe I want it to go further away. Maybe I want to do all sorts of stuff and personalize it, right? So that means that you have to dive into that code that's being called. When nobody likes diving into the code, at least some of the programmers do, but I want to show you guys that it's really not that easy, and it's really cool. So I'm going to go find what is being called. I'm going to go to CSS, go to Animations. And holy moly, right? We've got all of this stuff here, right? So if let's just search slide. So here we are. Here's our starting point, right? Slide right. What is going on here? So the first thing is the animation name, right? So that's just the name. That could be anything. That could be Cal's animation. But further on down in the code, there has to be some significance to that name, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Animation name, cool. So the problem with animations right now is that you have to have tons of vendor affixes, right? So you have to have affixes for Chrome. You have to have affixes for Opera, WebKit, all sorts of junk. But that's further on down the road, hopefully that will go away and everyone will use the same exact stuff. But for now, you have to have it. Animation duration. So this is how long you want that animation to run for, right? So if it's 5 seconds, let's change it to 5. We're on Chrome, so WebKit, right? Let's do both. 5 seconds, let's see what happens. Okay, it looks like it's going 5 seconds, right? It makes sense. Pretty cool. So it's that easy, right? It makes sense. Animation duration, how long it's going to last, right? So let's go back to, let's say 1. And the ease in and the ease out, honestly, I don't really know what those do yet, but I think it has to do with the transition before it starts. And that's CSS transitions, which I'm not going to talk about that much in this episode, but that's a whole other world of how elements change, not necessarily animate, but change. Like if you want a button to, on the hover, you want it to fade to that color, that would be a transition. That would be like an ease in to that color. Visibility important. This has to do with just this guy's library because you can download extra JavaScript that makes it invisible until XYZ happens. So don't worry about that part. But here's where we get into the fun. Okay, so that name that we talked about here, we could call it Cal's animation, is being called right here where it says keyframes slide right. Right, so those two things have to be the same. Make sense? It's basically calling this action. And the keyframes are the animation. So if we see here, we have 0, 50%, 65%, 80%, 95%, and 100%. Right, so that is the time of the animation. Okay, so if our animation is 5 seconds long, at 100% is going to be at 5 seconds. Right? What's 50% going to be? 2.5. 2.5 seconds. Right? It's half as long. Right? So that's how you can control the time. And so, like, if you want your bounce to, or let's say you have a bouncing ball, right? Or you're throwing something and it accelerates. You want, from 0 to 20 to might be faster than from 0 to 100, right? So you can create different kind of levels of speed depending on what time you're at. Okay, so within each time, we have a call right here, transform and translate x minus 150%. Okay, so what do you think that means? Translate x. Let's imagine we had a graph x and y, right? Translate x, a horizontal axis, 150%. So we're basically going left 150% at 0. That's at the very start. And then at 50%, so at halfway, we're going to go all the way back, right? But we're going to go even further, 8%. And then at 65%, we're going to go back 4. So that's the jiggle, right? This right here, all of this is the jiggle. And by jiggle, I mean the bounce, right? It's a right? So if I want to slide in theory, if I comment this out, let's comment out the WebKit also. In theory, it should go right to it, right? Wow! Everybody say wow! Right? Very cool, right? So there's tons of applications here. I personally have not done much more besides. No, thank you. I have not done much more besides translate Y and translate X, and also opacity. Those are all kind of the entrance animations. If you want to do more stuff where you have actions happening as a user scrolls or when something is clicked on, then you have to do some JavaScript, right? And that's, I didn't want to get into that this meeting, no JavaScript, right? But it's pretty simple, and the guy talks about how to do it. Basically all you're doing is when an element is clicked on, you're applying that class. However, with CSS, we can do it with hover, right? Which is super nice because we can make it so if you hover on something, boom, we can have an animation. Okay, so let's check that out. Let's go into our index, and hopefully I push the latest. Cool. So I'm going to make this image show up. I'm going to save, and I'm going to say, oh no, the image. I think we can do this on something else. Where is an image? Shoot. Can you send me the SVG?
Any chance you can just eliminate the slash at the beginning? It's not sitting in there, is it?
You want me to delete?
It said slash media slash.
Is it in your media folder? right? Because this is being pulled through on Firebug, but I couldn't find the keyframes. So I had to guess. You know, I had to figure it out myself. And what happened was, scroll up, I made something like this. So animation delay, 0 seconds. That means it loads right away, right? I can make it load in 10 seconds, but I didn't. And animation duration is 0.9 seconds. Iteration count, how many times it happens, right? Pretty obvious. And so what I did is I guessed that this is the kind of thing that was going on. At 0%, there is no, you can't see it, right? It's completely opaque or transparent. Completely transparent. And at 100%, we are 100% opaque. Is that the right way to say it?
Yes.
And we're translating y from 10% to 0%, right? So if we scroll back up, this class is named Fade In Up. So let's go and let's put it, I'm going to try and copy how that guy did it, and we'll do Fade In Up. Were there any capitals?
No.
Yeah. We'll save. And let's check it out. There it goes.
Wow.
Right? That easy. Hardly any code. Right? Super cool, super fun. You know, you go waste some time playing around with this stuff. I think the real power in here is once you get it to when you click on something or when you scroll and stuff moves around, stuff changes really subtly, right? You never want to have too much, but the subtle stuff like this, I think really makes the page a lot nicer. And transitions. Let's talk about transitions real quick. So I have, anyone use Sasser? Cool, yeah. So I have a transition, or what's it called, a mix-in for a transition called transformers. And it's really fun to kind of just throw this mix-in on every single element. It's fun because, at least in responsive web design, a lot of the times your elements are moving around if the browser shrinks, right? And when you throw this on all your elements, you can see instead of just locking into those distinct structures, they fade in or they ease in, which is kind of fun. But the main thing I use this on is that mixing transformers is on buttons. So if I go down to my buttons, you can see it right here. At include transformers. Okay? So that means, I think is what it means. I haven't done much research on it, but is that anytime that element is changing, whether it's size or color, it will ask this transition, how should I change? Right? So in this transition is saying, what does it say? Ease in? Was that what it was? Ease. Yeah. So in theory, this should ease. Oh, that's a bad example because the color is so faint. It fades in, right? Instead of instantly switching, it eases into that. Just a nice little subtle action. Look at all these. Oh, those might not be targeted. But yeah, so that's basically the extent of my playing around with transitions. Is basically throw it on every element I can and see what changes and see what doesn't, and take it off if nothing happens. But yeah, so that's about all I have for CSS animations right now. I'm still learning a ton about them, right? All I've basically done is rotate, transform, and opacity, but there's a lot more. And people, like we saw, make these nice animation generators, so you don't have to type out all of that, you know, vendor like WebKits and keyframes and all sorts of stuff. And then you just copy paste this right in and put that class on any element you want to move. And that's all you got. And that's it. Cool. So intermission while Scott gets prepared here.
So how general is browser support?
It's pretty good. It's pretty good and it's getting better, right? I think this page, or here, I'll send a page that has a diagram of. I'll send out an email that has all these websites and another website that has the browser support thing. But let me pull it up right now. This one? Yeah. Microphone?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Who's gonna go do some animations?
So I take it if you do something like in JavaScript, apply a class that starts a transition, since that must have been what they were doing on the guide page.
Yeah, do you want to talk about how that
So
works?
the only trick is, and actually, if you just want to do an animation one time, it's really super easy. You just do jQuery.add class and you're done. It adds the class and the class immediately fires off the animation. So that's super easy. It's a little trickier if you want like every time I click, it redoes the animation. Then basically you have to wait till the animation's over, take the class off, and put it back on. Because it's only going to do it when the class is there. If you just try to put the class back on and it's already on there, it's not going to redo the animation. But it's just a line of code. There's a little thing. Just wait for the finished event or something. That's pretty easy. But just you want to do the animation one time.
So you can, in theory, get rid of all of your JavaScript animations.
Yeah, and actually one thing that's really worth mentioning is that the CSS animations are way faster than browser animation, even JavaScript animation. So it's not a huge deal here, but if you go to an iPhone 3 or whatever, and you have it small and you try to look at some jQuery animations, they're going to like chop all over the place. CSS animations are really fast. They're hardware accelerated. So when you can use them, and every mobile browser is going to support them. That's probably not BlackBerry. That like it's going to be really fast.
Here's a quick support. Oh no, I'm on. I'm sharing my screen.
Looks like.
But the main one that shows up is.
Oh, is this one?
What's like.
Yeah. So this is Safari, Firefox. I don't know. I always deal with Safari, Firefox, Chrome, so I'm normally pretty safe. But yeah, it's Internet Explorer 10. I'll just play with it, go with it, because if it doesn't load, your element's just going to be there anyway, right? So the fallback, you don't really have to do a fallback unless you're hiding something. And let's see really quickly if we go back to this guy, Mr. T. So he talks about how it works, and including this, you just throw everything I talked about. And so entrance animations, you need to make them invisible. And then so so here's the jQuery, and this one is saying Scott can probably make this a lot more make it more sense than I'm about to say. But basically, scroll and then until the top of the window is 400 pixels, then add the class. Right. So that's the kind of thing where as you're scrolling, something happens. Right. And so a classic example, I could do that, or Robin had their exact same thing. Specify.com. And so if I'm scrolling, boom. Right, so that's exactly what that's a real world example, right? And that's it.
Hit the get early access button. Just don't type it.
Okay. And then there's another one, right? So these are all CSS, and if you recognize this is, all the kind of fun stuff. Okay, cool. So I think that's it, and I hope everyone enjoys animating. Questions? Cool. Let's figure out how to speed our pages up so they can support these animations. I'll cut this.
Alright, we'll open that. Okay, are we back?
So I can turn mine off now, right?
Yes. So we... Oh my god! Alright, let's get that out of here. Scott, are you... How come I can't find...
Okay.
Yeah,
I was just... Can you guys probably see and hear me?
There's Scott. Okay, let's do this. This is a Scott cam.
Okay.
Right
A lot of presentations. Okay. So let's see, what do I have here? That's CSS that's that. Okay, so that's just share my screen, right?
We should show Scott's.
Yeah.
Because this is the one that's on YouTube.
Yeah. So...
Okay, so Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah, we're looking at your email right now.
All right, can you see this? You see
Yes.
this?
Uh-huh.
And then the PowerPoint.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. So, I wanted to...
We have a question from the audience.
We have a question.
Where
can I get a jQuery shirt?
Oh, I like the shirt. Yeah, this is from. It's actually really cool. The jQuery conference is in San Francisco, and it's cheap compared to regular conferences. So it's fun. It's a cool one to go to. It was right by McCovey Cove last time. Pretty cool. So yeah, I was going to talk today about page loads, making faster page loads, so I kind of want to start out. Oh god, this is terrible. That's okay. You don't need to see it. I kind of want to start out with the anatomy of a page load. What happens when you do a page load? This is, you obviously can't see it's okay, but if you pop up the developer tools while you're developing, it shows you all the CSS that's downloading, and I'll go through and do this live, and that's what that's a picture of. It shows you exactly what the browser is doing to get that page to you. But sort of in step form, since it's kind of interesting, and I hadn't really thought about this until I went to look into this, is really what's happening is obviously you go to a website, you get the HTML, that downloads. That's the first thing that happens, and that's sort of non-negotiable. Then the trick is the browser starts parsing that HTML top-down. Right? So it starts, it gets to your head tags, it's going through. In your head tags, it's going to see a link tag to your style sheets. Then what it does is it fires off a query for that style sheet. Right, and it goes down and through and through. Now, modern browsers, they'll do most of this asynchronously. They'll go see a CSS file, shoot a request for it, go to the next line, see a CSS file, shoot off the request for it. And so you'll see a lot of them going pretty much at the same time. Except there's some tricks to that, because CSS and images, for the most part, can be loaded asynchronously. But when you get to a JavaScript file, it stops parsing the HTML and waits for that JavaScript file to come back because it has to execute it immediately. It can't wait because JavaScript can do a lot of crazy stuff and can change content and can move all this stuff around. So you might see, if you looked in your browser, that it queued up 10 CSS files to be loaded. It got to a JavaScript file, it went and got that, came back, and then went to the next JavaScript file while your CSS is still loading, so lots of stuff can happen in parallel. But that is sort of the trick with JavaScript. You have to be really careful about that. So after you get everything off, oh, actually, so number 5 is interesting. So as you're going down and it's parsing its way through your document, whatever it gets to, it's going to push on the screen. So if it's halfway through your page and it sees another JavaScript file or an image or something and has to wait, you'll see the screen up to that point that it's done parsing. So that's why you'll see a lot of you'll see the half the page, you'll see the sidebar loaded in the header, and then the content takes a few minutes, all that kind of stuff. Top down completely in your HTML. So once it's done, once everything is parsed, not necessarily when everything's done loaded. When everything's done parsed, it gets to the end of your close body, close HTML tag, it's going to fire this onload event. Now, if you have in your HTML onload equals and you put some JavaScript in there, that's when it'll fire. More commonly, you do the jQuery.load thing, and that's when that'll fire. And at that point, it's ready. Maybe not all the CSS is there, probably it is. Maybe not all the images are loaded yet, but you'll get this load and then you can interact with all the stuff. Your JavaScript's all there. However, yeah, there's some other things that may still be loading. So if we only knew that, like, what are the lessons we can learn here? Definitely put all your CSS as much as possible at the top. Put them in a link tags, put them at the top. Don't put... You see a lot of times where people will put the CSS later on where they're going to use it, or you'll have the big script tags instead of doing links. They've sort of figured out that if you just link your content, it's way faster. Put your JavaScript at the bottom. That's the big one that you don't see done a lot. It's not always 100% possible because there are some things your JavaScript may need to do. Modernizer is a good example. It wants to be in there before your content loads so it can do stuff and put classes on. But almost never do you need to put your JavaScript in the header. And all it's going to do is, we now know, is stop your page from rendering while it's waiting for that JavaScript. Right? So throw that at the bottom. Throw it right below the closing body tag. Let's see. And actually, there's one interesting caveat, although now that IE9 is sort of dying, it's not going to matter anymore, but some browsers can only load a certain number of resources from the same domain. So if you have 3 CSS files on UCDSIDU and 2 JavaScript files, as soon as it hits a limit, it says, oh, I've grabbed 2 or I've grabbed 5 from the same domain. It just waits until it gets one of those back, which can be super slow. So you have to be really careful there. And in addition, even if that didn't happen, most browsers can do a lot from the same, so it's not as big of a deal. But each additional request has some connection overhead, and if you have HTTPS, you've got that little SSL handshake you've got to do every time. So if I have 20 CSS files, I'm making a request for each one, and I've got to do the whole TCP DNS lookup, find it, go there, make the handshake, come back, open up sockets, all that kind of stuff. So if you can reduce your overall number of requests, that's always better. Image sprites, CSS sprites are a common way of doing this. Just load it once. It's the same number of bytes, sure, but you get it all in one chunk, and you don't need to make all the additional requests. And on things like phones, like those additional requests are really expensive. It's got to open up all these ports. They don't have a lot of great parallel processing power. So sort of simple stuff you can do. Most of it's probably pretty commonly already done, except putting the JavaScript on the bottom, which can make a huge difference. So yeah, that's a lot of that stuff is perceived speed difference, which is huge. I mean, you really want to get your users to be able to interact with the page as fast as possible. How long it takes for the whole thing to load is not 100% as important, but obviously very important. So let's talk about how we can make a real big difference. And there's sort of 2 common categories here. The first one is caching things. Cache is huge. Cache is very, very important, and cache is dramatically underused. So Yahoo did some studies and found out for most main websites, a large percentage, 80+% of all requests come from a primed cache. The user has been to that site before. So this may be that you just came back to the site, or it may be you went to the home page and you're clicking around, you're looking at the news, you're looking at the other pages or whatever. Almost all the content's going to be the same, but it's a new page, so you're reloading stuff, right? So since we have a very few number of pages which are from an empty cache, we can speed up all of those 75–85% of requests by telling the browser to cache stuff. And the 2 ways we commonly do that are to use expires headers and cache control headers. So expires headers are sort of an older way of doing things. They work just fine. Every browser supports it. You basically put a header in your HTML that says when you want this to expire. Pretty simple. Since you're using static content, let's say you have an image. Let's say it's like the UC Davis logo. That's not going to change. And if it changes, you can call it logo 2 or logo new or whatever, right? But you have this UC Davis header, and you say it expires in 2015. The next time the person comes to the site, their browser will be like, well, it's not 2015 yet. I'm not even going to bother making the request. Right? So you've already saved a request, and you've saved however many bytes it would have taken to download that. Right? So then there's a newer thing that's called cache control. It's okay if you have both of them. Cache control will overwrite whatever you put in expires if you have it there. A lot of sites you'll see with both. The cache control is the newer one. Basically, it's a little more flexibility. What you do here is you say the max age in seconds that you want this thing to be cached for. That number is 1 day. You can specify up to 1 year. So you specify that, and then you have a bunch of options. Public is a pretty common one. It basically means anyone can go ahead and cache this content. Browsers, CDNs, HTTP proxies. We use all sorts of crazy stuff. Basically, between you and the server, there's a lot of layers which can be caching stuff. So public, you're saying go ahead, cache whatever. There's private, which means only the browser can cache, and there's a whole bunch more depending on how specific you want to get. So the great thing is they're ridiculously easy to add cache headers. Right? In Apache, you just tell it what kind of files you want to cache, and here I'm doing JS, CSS, but in reality, you probably want to cache your images as well. You just say set the cache control header to whatever you want it to be. Right? That's 1 line of code, and probably makes your site way faster. I have some stats on the next screen. But it's really easy to do, and so the trick you have to remember is once a browser has cached a file, it's not going to go back and ask for that file again until you're done caching. even just setting cache to an hour is very useful compared to nothing. Because if someone went to a main page and then they started scrolling around your site, all your CSS is the same, most your headers, most your whatever. Even if it's just for a small amount of time, that's nice. However, if you specify it for a long, long time, the person comes back the next week or whatever, they still won't have to make any requests. However, if you change the image on your server or you change the CSS on your server, it's not going to get the updated because it's cached. So there's lots and lots and lots of things you can do. Most people will put, you can put a question mark v1, question mark v2, and just update that number every time. That works totally fine. Most people who do static sites, they'll have a little bit of a build process where things, all their files get, like you do stuff in SCSS, when it gets compiled into CSS, it attach a number. So it'll be like styles dash ABCDE and some little hash code, little MD5 or something, .css. That's unique every time. If it's the same, you know the content's the same, cache it for as long as you feel like. So it's pretty useful to do that. And so I went and grabbed some stats from UC-Davis.edu, and they do a pretty decent job of caching in some respects. So these numbers are kind of interesting, but with no cache, so if you just go to the page for the first time, 104 requests, CSS, images, JavaScript, everything. And it's about 1.9 megabytes. Crap ton of data comes in. So 1.9 megabytes comes in with no cache. Took me a little over a second when I'm sitting on my direct fiber connection in the basement, right? So that's when you come with no cache for the first time. And so what's interesting is if you look at primed cache, a lot different, right? The data is 52K. Now, the time didn't make much difference because I'm on campus and data transfers really fast. But I have a few less requests, which is sort of interesting. But you see I still made a whole lot of requests. Now, most of those never went over the wire, but I still made quite a few requests. And so the reason here is because, and I'll show you what they look like, the cache headers on Davis don't use those cache control headers we talked about earlier. They use some different mechanisms. That basically what happens is I'm going to ask for a CSS file. And it comes back and it says, okay, here's a CSS file, here's some information about it. Now normally if we set up the cache headers correctly, when I came back the second time, it wouldn't ask for that file again. However, in this case, what it's doing is asking for the file again, and Davis's server is telling me it hasn't changed. So no size gets transferred, but I still made the request. Right? So that's pretty good. That's halfway there, but we still make a whole ton of requests. Right? So let's go take a look at what that looks like in practice. Here's UC-Davis.edu, and so I'm going to zoom in.
Oh, I've lost your screen share.
It's on the screen share, but it's not on.
Oh, you need to move it over.
Oh.
There you go.
There we go. Okay, never mind. Let me just do a mirror. That will be easier. And so, okay, so here's UC-Davis.edu. I will bump the size up here in a minute. But so we go in, we load this site. And if I go load it once and I wait and then I load it again, I'm going to have a fully primed cache. So when I zoom in here, like so, zoom in a little more, we see here at the bottom, I'm covering it up, that we had 104 requests, 52 kilobytes transferred, a little under a second it took. Right? And so when we go look at the request, interesting, it made 104 requests. It made 100 last time. Okay, so when we go up and see what's actually happening here, let me load this again. It doesn't seem to have grabbed my cache stuff. Okay, so when we go in here and we look at, I don't know if you guys have ever used, you maybe use a Firefox version, but they're pretty similar. This is the Chrome dev tools. When you go in and see what this file responded with, when I asked for this print.css, it came back from cache. That's good. And when you look at the content and stuff, what you'll see is there's a thing called the E tag, which is sort of a specific tag just for the file. And then you'll see a last modified date. Mm-hmm. And so it tells you when it last changed. And for some reason, which I'm not figuring out right now, that's what I want to see. I don't know why I didn't do this first time. So now it's got all these not modifieds. That's what we expect to see with the caching. So you don't see very much, but basically what happened is this went out, and it said, okay, here's the stuff I know about this file I'm asking for. I know some basic information. I know the tag you sent me last time. And it goes out to Davis, and it comes back, and it says, hey, this tag you asked for, that's the same tag that I have on the server. Don't bother downloading it again. You have the latest version. Right? So this is an example of it made the request, came back, and had no new files to do. Right? So that's pretty good. It's better caching. You're not transferring stuff over the wire. But if we did actual cache control, it would never bother making that request. And so don't really have a good example of that, except with that line I showed you before. If you add those cache, if you go to like look at jQuery.com or something, look at the jQuery file that's loaded in, you'll see that. Wow, it's like partial screen. That's okay. So yeah, if you just set these cache control headers on your JavaScript files, it's will help things quite a lot. So the next thing to talk about, so that's a pretty free thing you can do, right, to get a lot of speed for your returning customers, which is a huge percentage. But for your first-time customers and first-time customers and just overall page loading, there's they call it the big three things you can do to make your pages load way faster. I've probably heard all these before, but you want to minify all your content. Don't waste white space. You want to concatenate everything together. Don't make 100 requests for your there's 20-something CSS files and 20-something JavaScript files. Don't make that connection happen every time. Just go out and grab it and download it once. And then gzip, which is a very often overlooked and can make a ridiculously big difference. And every browser supported it since like 2000. Right. So the first one, minify all of your CSS and your JavaScript. There's tons of tools that can do it. Most development environments have it built in. If not, there's very easy command line tools to do this. They use a thing called CodeKit, which basically automatically does it every time they click save. A lot of builds will do it. You'll see content management systems like Plone and stuff. They'll automatically minify your content on the way back out, I think. Some of them will anyway. There's fancy things these days like Grunt and Gulp, if you've ever heard of those guys, that will basically just sit and watch your files, and every time they change, it will build stuff together, right? So there's a lot of very easy tools to do it that integrate with anywhere you are. And it can make a very, very large difference. So that's a link up there to one of the compressors, YUI. It's the Yahoo compressor that can compress everything. JavaScript, there's tons of different compressors for compressing JavaScript. I'll show some numbers later, but they can make a really big difference. And once you have a build process set up for minifying, it's easy to then sort of get the concatenate step together, because really all that is take all the text in 20 files and put them in one file, right? And call it main CSS or whatever. So I sort of mentioned all this stuff before, but the real thing is that less requests equal a way faster page. A huge difference in older browsers and mobile browsers, but when you have a fast connection like Davis, it's not so much downloading the actual bits over the air. It's about making those little connections and having to wait for each of them to asynchronously come back, right? So you make less requests, it's a faster page. Yahoo lists this as their #1 thing you can do to improving first-time visit performance. Concatenate your stuff down to one file, or as few number of files as you can, which is pretty big considering you're not actually changing the file sizes or anything. If you just put things together into a small number of files, this includes things like sprites and CSS and that kind of stuff, less images. Your pages load much, much, much faster. So the other thing you can do, which I think is really cool, that you can gzip to a content, and it's really exactly like sending a zip file to a browser, right? Every time I send a file, I send a CSS file. Imagine if you could take that file, right-click, add to zip. It saves all that space, and then send that along. Well, it turns out you can, and every browser supports receiving zipped content, and has for the last 15 years back to IE5, right? So don't worry about that. It's very, very easy to configure on the server as well. Basically, I've got two examples. Apache uses a thing called deflate, and there's a couple ways to do it. You can either just set deflate on your location, and it will deflate everything automatically, or you can add output filter deflate to whatever types of things you want to output filter. It's very, very simple. There's really like no downside at all. I mean, they used to basically allow it off by default because people were worried like their servers would take a few extra seconds to compress everything, but servers do nothing all day long, so it's no longer anything to worry about. Plus, it takes almost no work. And so if you look at these requests, as I zoom way in, whenever I make a request somewhere, oh, God, what has happened? Oh, I went back over here. Oh, well, I can figure this out. So if we go through here, whenever I make a request, this is my browser asking for a resource from the server, right? My browser wants the CSS file. Okay, my browser wants the CSS file, and it says, I can accept gzipped content, I can accept deflated content, and whatever this thing is, right? So your browser is always telling the server it can. So if you do have a browser like IE, one of your users is using IE4, right? They won't say that they can accept gzip, and you'll just send them the whole thing. So there's really no downside to it, right? But everyone will always send this. I've never seen a request that didn't say they can accept gzip, and it will ask for it. And then what happens is when you go down here, you will see the response, and this is a bad example because this one does not accept gzip. But most of these do. Well, let's go to jQuery. And of course, it's not modified. Cache does not care about gzip. All right, so if we go to jQuery, even though that's not really jQuery, here we go. Okay, so you'll see here that in the response, it said, okay, I sent you some content, oh, and I gzipped it. So your browser will automatically just unzip it and shove it up. Really cool, really easy, makes a gigantic difference. Everybody supports it. To do it. So I went and I did some tests for this one line of code, right? So I went to UC-Davis IDEA, and the style sheets will start on the left. I should have shown these one at a time. So the style sheets, there's 23 of them. They're 218K of data, right? As far as I can tell, 21 of them are unminified. The only ones that are minified are the ones that basically came from Google, like the Google fonts. So basically all style sheets from UC-Davis are unminified. I just went through and I minified them all, and I can save 32% on every page load, right? Just off UC-Davis off the bat. And that's not concatenating anything. That's not gzipped. I am not counting gzipped here yet. I don't know why I didn't. But then when we look at jQuery, it's kind of a similar thing. We have 25 scripts, a lot of data, 671K. They're all unminified and ungzipped. Now that's all internal. There are some pre-gzipped ones like jQuery. jQuery comes through minified and gzipped. But if I go through and I just zip up the 547, if I zip up all of the JavaScript on UC-Davis IDEA, I end up with a 19% improvement in the bytes transferred over the wire. And then if I add gzip to it, I mean, look at that number. It's 75% less. And we could expect that if I minified the CSS, I'd probably have a similar number. So we can assume that probably adding gzip and doing some minification would speed up the main page 80%. That's pretty big. And essentially, the minification is a little tricky. I mean, you've got to add something to your process that when you make changes, they get minified. But it would take someone an hour. And then adding that gzip line is a huge savings, which is nothing. And then adding cache on top of this is also a really huge saving, which takes almost nothing to do. And so that's about it. I think we're about at the time. These tools are sort of the tools of the trade for checking out this stuff. YSlow is the one from Yahoo and Google PageSpeed. They're browser add-ons, and you can even just type in a URL online. It will tell you. It'll tell you all this stuff. It'll say, hey, you should minify your content. You should put cache control headers. It will tell you which things have the cache control, which ones don't. It will also tell you some things that you shouldn't care that much about unless you're like a gigantic site using CDNs and stuff like that. But it will tell you most of this stuff and more. one of the things I didn't really mention is optimizing images if you use big images. Everyone these days likes the big image front and center on your screen. You'll be kind of surprised if you go to one of those images, download it, and run it through an optimizer. It can be 30% less, or way more if it's actually like non-processed, taken from a photograph with basically no loss of quality. And then in addition to that, you can tweak the quality as well, which makes yours, you're probably already doing a lot of that with Photoshop. But even after that, you can optimize even better. So yeah, if nothing else, please cache and gzip your content. You know, you'll see a main page like the home page could probably be 50% faster just within an hour. And then if you minify and concatenate everything together, that will help your mobile clients a lot, and it will help everyone else be that additional, I don't know, 30% or so faster. So there you go. Do it.
Speed it up.
Speed it up. Let's see.
Any questions?
Who's gonna go minify that stuff?
Minify your stuff. Do it.
I just thought I'd mention if you're using, for those of us using Diazo, it's like adding 2 lines to move all the JavaScript to the bottom.
Perfect.
So
Yeah.
it's nearly free.
Yeah.
And if you don't have time to minify, gzip is getting you 99% of the way there already.
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
And if you're picking
Absolutely.
up boilerplate for gzipping, like for Apache from old versions, it will often exclude CSS and JavaScript files from the gzipping, and that's because of an old bug in Internet Explorer. That bug is prehistoric. Don't worry about it.
Cool. Good stuff.
Yeah, that's it.
Thanks.
Is this something?
Oh,
The Scotsons.
this one. Oh, okay.
The
It's live.
sound will be on there. Okay, that's it. Thanks for hanging out.
See you next time.
Bye.
Okay.
Thank you. Cool. It sounds like it was good.
Anybody want to present next month?
Good
Oh,
job. I can't top it.
you're thinking.
Maybe.
About it.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I'll send you something.
Okay.
Okay. Thanks. Okay, that's fine.
Okay, I'm gonna quit.
Does anybody know a tool for sort of automatic construction? That would like generate the
Ooh,
CSS.
There's a thing in CSS that's an auto sprite generator.
That's
Oh,
a good
really?
idea,
Oh,
though.
that's
Yeah, I haven't used it, but it looked pretty chill.
I'll have to
Let
check
me
that
find it real
out.
quick.
Sprites are such a pain if you do
Yeah.
it manually.
Yeah.